Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Anxiety Warriors podcast. We are your hosts, Margot
and Abby. We are friends, teachers, and storytellers, but above all, we're anxiety warriors on a mission to raise awareness and understanding about anxiety and mental health.
You will hear honest, engaging, and joyful stories from us and many other anxiety warriors about living with anxiety. If you're seeking a space to laugh, connect, feel inspired and empowered, and learn valuable tips rooted in mindfulness and more, your warrior community is here for you.
Join us as we navigate this journey of life together.
Welcome, warriors.
Yay!
We are excited that you're back with us this week.
With another topic. We're still doing it.
I know. It's like, it is bizarre when I feel like we haven't run out of topics.
Yeah.
It's bizarre a little bit.
Yep. In our fourth season. Yep.
There's just so many things to say that we still want to say, I guess.
And we haven't had specialists on telling us all how to live our lives, right? Because you can always have topics when you have specialists specializing in anxiety, right?
True.
We just talk about anxiety. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Right. And when it's just you and me, right? It's like you'd think we would have run out of topics for just the two of us, not just like, oh, we're hearing people's anxiety story.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, of course, that's separate. But yeah, just coming up with our own stuff that's happening in our lives or that we've heard from listeners or people on Instagram or I don't know. We wind up getting inspired by a lot of videos and things that we see on Instagram, I feel like. Or our own experiences.
I feel like it's my own experience. I feel like anytime I feel anxiety, I'm like the topic today is because it happened recently. And I was like, oh God.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about this yet. So.
No, it's about 50-50 for me too. It's like 50% is like, this just happened. And then like we try to jot it down so we remember to talk about it. Yeah. And then the other 50% is just like, I'll see someone share something in a reel or on a post. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
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 All right. So what are we talking about?
We're talking about basically the anxiety of making first impressions or like when interacting with someone for the first time. And I feel like there's an added layer when you feel socially awkward, which is what I feel a lot when interacting with people for the first time, unless I'm in like the expert setting where I get to like be the expert and I'm just like talking at people, right? But yeah, I feel like a number of times recently I've had like a first impression thing where like afterwards I have ruminating thoughts and overthinking thoughts about like, oh God, was I weird? You know.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's really normal, or at least
maybe it is. Maybe
I think it's normal.
We'll find out.
I think it's normal. Like I would say that even I've heard from like people that consider themselves extroverts.
Yeah.
Right. That like they still get random bouts of social anxiety or like they still want to make sure they make a good first impression, even if like, yeah. So I feel like some of it is just like human behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start today with a little ditty, a little thing I found online.
Yeah. A little fun fact.
Little ditty, a little fun fact. I found an article on Psychology Today. It's short. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but a couple of key points. I'm going to read little blurbs of it. It says, human beings are built to size each other up quickly. These first impressions are influenced by a number of factors such as facial shape, vocal inflection, attractiveness, and general emotional state. People tend to get attached to their initial impressions of others and find it very difficult to change their opinion, even when presented with lots of evidence to the contrary.
No wonder there's so much pressure. Like
I know. Reading it at first, I was like, "Oh God!" I didn't even think about facial shape. Okay, vocal inflection, sure, maybe, but like all those little things, it's just like, okay, now do I have more anxiety? Maybe a little bit, but let me continue. As a result, it's important to be aware of how one comes across to others during a first meeting. Then one can employ impression management skills, modulating any irritating traits. I have some feelings about this. Accentuating one's strengths to ensure that people have a more favorable opinion of one. Everything from clothing style and posture to conversational topics can be adjusted to form a better first impression. So I'm going to stop there. Let's just like digest that a little bit.
Yeah. I really like the word impression management skills. I like that. That was good. I got attached to that.
It feels you some agency.
Yeah. And like, I feel like, and I could be wrong, I feel like part of when you're like, I gotta say something, like, I feel like you're like gonna say something like, why should you change yourself? Right? Like, just be yourself when you meet people. But part of me, but I could be wrong. Maybe you're not gonna say that at all. But part of me is also like, oh my gosh, like how much has like this skill building been happening since we were like 5,
Mm,
right? Like how much has been conditioned in us in making first impressions, and then when it
yeah.
doesn't go the way we like think it is, it's like, oh crap, because like I didn't do all my charm or my charisma or say the right thing. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. No, I
yeah,
totally do. But what stuck out to me and made me feel like I wish that either I wish that wasn't a thing or I feel like that's unfair was
mhm.
the part where it was like, modulating irritating traits and
Yeah,
accentuating
that's
one's strengths.
yeah,
That really tugs at me because I'm like, okay, so what you're saying is change who you are,
right,
behave, right? Modulate your behavior or
yeah,
things that might be inherent, things that, obviously everything is different all the time. Things might be a learned trait, things might be inherent. And do we necessarily know which one of those things is which if we haven't done a lot of like healing or inner work or like curiosity or any of that or all of that kind of stuff?
yeah.
So, yeah, that
I knew
that kind
that's
of
the part
just
that I couldn't remember the phrase, but that's the part I knew that you wanted to like
well,
talk
it's
about.
staring me in the face. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's easier for me to just grab at it.
right. And it's
Um,
like it's I feel like there's like both sides because like, I received feedback from society that I'm too loud, right? So
yes, I've heard that
I've
for myself
learned,
as well.
yeah, I've learned to modulate that. I don't always do it well, right? But I've learned to modulate that just based on feedback of like when I go into a room and I'm like, hey, and people are like, you're too loud. And I'm like, okay, right?
Right.
Yeah. Am I toning myself down or am I opening up the possibility to meet more people on a good first impression so that I can then be more of myself the next time?
Interesting. That's interesting. I don't know. And it's like my issue is always like who's to say what's right or wrong?
Yeah.
and and first impression, it's like your first impression on one person, they might look at you, listen to you, have a conversation, get to know you, whatever, and love everything about you.
Yeah.
And then another person has the exact same interaction with you. Maybe you're standing in a group of 3 people, you and 2 other people, and the other person's like, I didn't get any of that from that person. I did. And so it's just like, how often do we feel the need to change aspects of who we are or how we sound or what we look like or whatever in order to be perceived by the external world in some kind of way?
And who are we trying to appease? I mean, this goes into like anxious attachment or attachment theory in general. If you're an anxious attachment and you're appeasing the other secures and anxious, but the avoidant is judging you, you're like, oh, like
Yeah.
I gotta modulate myself so I can have this person who's emotionally unavailable find me interesting, right? So again, yeah, it's like who are we? Who is society telling us, and then who
Mm,
ourselves are we trying to modulate for?
interesting. All right, let me move on here.
Yeah.
How to make a good first impression.
Oh,
It
gross.
takes a
I'm already ready to vomit. Okay.
Oh, I
Here.
know, I know. Well, I thought this would be this is why this is fun. This is good for us. It takes a mere 7 seconds to make a first impression. People thin slice others based on how a person looks and sounds more so than their explicit verbal statements. Often, someone's first impression is influenced by implicit attitudes of which they are unaware, which explains impulsive actions like giving special preference to those with physical beauty or more easily trusting a person who has a baby face, for example. The observational powers or biases of the observer are just as important as the qualities projected by the target or the person being judged, making these judgments a constant dance between objective information and selective signal reading.
This is why I'm going to continue to dye my hair. Right there. That's it. Right? Like,
I mean, 7 seconds, which I
yeah.
guess makes sense to some extent, right?
Yeah. And I look younger without gray hair. So,
I
like,
mean, we all do.
we all do, right? Oh, it's so messed up. It's so
Yeah.
messed up.
So
Yeah.
interesting. But what's interesting, right? Is like we're taking those things into account first before we even truly listen to
Right.
what a person's saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's all
So,
based on like preconceived notions and implicit bias and things we're not even fully aware of.
We're right. I'm glad that they said the word biases in there, right? Because that is literally what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see what we got here. How important is the first impression? People quickly judge others' trustworthiness, strength, and intentions to do harm based on subtle facial and vocal cues. These
Okay.
traits may differ slightly across cultural lines. For example, some studies have found that Chinese societies form first impressions based on competence, like perceptions of intelligence or social status, rather than on physical strength.
Okay. What about the Americans? What do Americans do?
I don't know. I'm guessing it's all beauty.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't say.
Like
That
if
was the only
you're
study
physically
they.
attractive, we're going to
Yeah,
naturally like you right away.
right. Um, let's see what we got. Oh, this was interesting. What kind of first impressions do you make? People tend to be self-critical after an initial conversation
Oh, good.
and
Okay.
right? I know I found that helpful. I'm like, okay, that's what I'm saying. It's normal. Wrongly assume that they've made a bad first impression. Experts call this tendency to underestimate one's likability called the liking gap. People may also be fooled by the spotlight effect, which leads them to believe that others are hyper focused on them, judging them for every imperfection, awkward question, or bad joke. It's basically just describing what it means to be socially anxious right there.
Yeah, right.
Is all the assumptions and overthinking that we have about how we're being perceived, like in the
Mhm.
immediate.
Right. And like I know I'm a likable person to a good amount of people. But then when I'm like a weirdo upon first meeting someone, I'm like, oh, this is so like I just can't
But
stop.
who decides you were a weirdo? When you say I'm a weirdo when I meet a
Well,
person,
I'll tell
what
you
does
the
that mean?
story and then we'll decide together.
Oh, okay. But even without you telling me the story, right? Like in your own mind, what is it that's triggering to you that made you think I'm a weirdo or this person's probably going to find me weird? Because it's not about them at that point.
Um, it's it's behavior that they maybe didn't expect, and because they don't know me, and like in one, I have like two stories. In one instance, I was doing something. I should just tell the stories, and
Okay, so
you'll
let's just do
see
that then.
why.
Let's dive in.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you the story that first like initiated this idea of a topic. And then I'm going to tell you another recent story that happened as well. Um, so as you know, Dan and I were seeing improvised Shakespeare. And it was so fun and we loved it. And we ended up going like 6 times. And every time I went, like I posted a story about it to like hype them up. And if anyone lived in the Denver area, like let them know. And so one of the times, the like guy that created improvised Shakespeare, his name is Blaine. He's extremely talented. He is so talented. Like DM me and was like, "Hey, thanks for sharing." And then I like was like, "Oh my gosh, I love improv and I felt like I haven't really found amazing improv." Like this is all through DM. Like, and
Yeah.
you all are amazing and I love you all. So I didn't say I love you all, but you all are amazing and it was just so refreshing to just see magic on stage and, already excited for next like just but it was okay, right? I wasn't like a weirdo in DM. I was a fan in DM, but not a weirdo.
Okay.
And then we went to see, I think it was like our fourth show, right? With Sarah and Sarah's date and Dan and I. And there was like this really funny part that's not going to be funny at all to anyone that's listening. But it was like this part in their show where you couldn't tell if they were messing with each other or if someone had made a mistake about something and you just couldn't tell. And so at the end of the night, Sarah, her date, me, and Dan were outside and we were going to go take a picture of improvised Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
And out walks Blaine with one of the other cast, and they were talking about that moment. And I was like, "Oh, was that real? Is it real?" It was like the name of a car, right?
Okay.
And then he was like, "Oh, hey, you're the one I was DMing with." And then I fangirled out like I met Leonardo DiCaprio, right? Like I was like, Yeah. Like I can't even now I'm so excited. I instantly, the moment he like recognized me and started talking to us, I got so giddy and I was like, tone it down. This is a human being, right? Like this is a human being. Treat them like a stranger, right? And I'm like, oh, the show was so good. And oh, we were just gonna take a picture to post on Instagram. And then he's like, oh, do you want me to like get in the picture with you? And we're like, yeah. And like I mean, I literally was acting like I had just, but I was also trying to tone it down. And then he walked away and I'm like, ah! And I'm like, did I act normal? Did I act? And Sarah's like, yeah, you acted normal. And, but I felt like a weirdo for like fangirling out over a human being. And I was like, oh my God, am I embarrassed? Am I not? Like, and then we went to another show like the next day because it was really gross and like a wintry mix. So there was like nothing to do. So we went there. And then I was like, oh my gosh, is he going to think like I'm a stalker? Right? Like, I don't know why I thought those things, but this is all that came up. And then I was like, definitely don't let him see you in the crowd. He's going to think you're a stalker and you're crazy. Like, okay. So that is the story that inspired this idea of first impressions, right?
Mm.
Like I got all out of sorts. And then we even went another time because I said we went to 6 times, right? And anyway, and then I like storied it and he was like, thanks for coming. And I was like, cool. And then we were cool. In
Yeah.
my mind, we were cool. And
Yeah.
that was it.
Yeah.
But I felt like I acted very excited.
Okay.
And and then I questioned, did I act too excited in front of him? And so that was that story. And then I have another socially awkward moment.
Is it separate? It's completely separate?
It's totally separate, which is why I'm telling you in case
Okay.
you a follow up.
Yeah, let's pause there. So, my gut tells me that anyone that performs on stage, right? Anyone that does something that's performative, they're whether it's improv or acting or singing or whatever, they adore being seen and adored and loved and appreciated. That's part of the reason I would assume. Maybe I shouldn't assume, but I feel like I've listened to enough interviews with celebrities or people or whatever who are just like there's something about the work that they love the spotlight, the attention, right? And so my gut tells me that this person's probably deeply flattered that you followed the show so closely, that you came several times, that I mean, you all had already technically met. Even if you didn't meet in person, you'd met via DMs.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, it's a first impression in person, but it isn't a whole first impression.
Okay.
And
Nice reframe.
I mean, it isn't, right? You didn't literally come out of nowhere and go, oh my God, I'm your biggest fan. And I'm not saying you didn't sound excitable or that you weren't super
Yeah.
smiley and yourself,
And I didn't ask for a
yourself,
picture. And then he
he
offered.
offered. So what I'm hearing is just that you are where your anxiety comes in is you're hoping because you respect this person and what they do and you're a
Mhm.
fan that they don't think you're weird because of whatever you think's going on in their mind about you. Whereas I'm suggesting that they're not thinking about you at all. And if they are, they're thinking that person really loves my work in this show. Because what you're not like scoping out their trying to find their email or trying to
No,
blow up their phone or like
no. I mean,
you're
I still
literally
follow them
just
on Instagram.
yeah, that
See
which
when
is
they're traveling, but
that's what you
that's
want.
the
That's what they
extent.
would want of their
Yeah,
fans. People that are spreading the word, people that are excited about what they're doing, because that's how they're going to be able to keep doing it.
that's true.
So,
But
you
feeling
know,
like a
you're being
girl
supportive,
feels
right?
fangirling feels like
Yeah,
totally
it's internal though. You're
modulate,
we create that.
modulate your management, your impression management skills, modulate those.
And yeah, and it sounds like though, what the other thing that I was going to say that I hear is that you were aware the whole time, that you
Yes,
weren't out of awareness. You were paying attention to your behavior, how you sounded. Remember this is a human. Like that's all incredible that you were able. That tells me that you were embodied, that you weren't being weird. You were just excited to meet this person in
I was
person
very
and that
excited.
he recognized you from Instagram and all
Yeah,
of that other stuff. Like to me, that sounds like a totally awesome, normal interaction. And if I were that person, I'd be like, oh my God, this person made my day. They were so excited to see me and the show. And
And they didn't bother me for a photo, but I was able to offer one, and I'm sure they liked that. And yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I just want to say, like, on a side note that has nothing to do with this conversation, is I'm really appreciative and happy that my husband can be okay with me being giddy over another man, right?
He knows
No,
there's no
because
threat there.
I've dated men that would get super jealous and insecure about that. And then I wouldn't be able
Yeah,
to act on that giddiness and feel that giddiness, right?
that's
But even
fair.
like afterwards, I was able to walk with Dan and be like, oh my God, sure. Right? And Dan is secure enough in our relationship and in himself to be able to be happy for me and my giddiness, right? Which
Yes.
I was very appreciative of that and told Dan that too. But like, yeah, I mean, it felt close to meeting Leo. Obviously not the same, but
Jeez. I would hope
all
it's
right.
not the same. Come on
Not
now.
the same, but he's so talented, Blaine. Blaine is very talented. He does something that I find extremely skillful and magical, and I wish I could be as talented as him, right? But yeah, okay, it wasn't like meeting Leo and Paul Rudd. But
No.
next step, right?
Yeah. I listen, I think you acted appropriately and you were able to connect to the experience during the experience,
Yeah. But
you
I
know?
definitely, after it, I was like, oh my God, did he hear me when I said I was excited? Like, oh my God, does he think I'm a weirdo? Does he think I'm a stalker? Because I was standing, like,
So if he were to think you were a weirdo, there's no way in hell he thinks you're a stalker. I don't buy that for a second. So let's just take that off the table. If he thought you were a weirdo,
yeah.
what happens then?
I mean, ultimately nothing. I'm just sharing the
Yeah,
anxiety that happened and all of the thoughts, the anxious thoughts that happen after that moment, right?
right. Yeah.
Like, ultimately, none of that matters. And I get that. But right after it happened, I had that flood of anxious thoughts and overthinking. And was I a weirdo? But again, who cares?
Yeah.
And yeah, he probably
Right.
did not think I was a stalker. Like, he's never going to see me again unless he comes to Denver. But still, that was some of the intrusive, anxious thoughts that were coming into my mind at that point, which was really annoying.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. That is annoying. Intrusive
Yeah.
thoughts. So
Right.
fucking annoying.
Yeah. Go away. I was feeling happy and giddy. Why'd you have to bring me down with questioning my behavior, anxiety? Yeah.
Right? Don't you
So
hate
there's
when she
that.
nags at you? Yeah. All right. So then what's the other story?
And then the other one is so as you know, like I volunteer at the zoo and I've been a mentor and I've met my mentees. And part of that is like, I want my mentees to like me, but I'm not going to tell that story, right? So one day, my mentee and I are going around and we're just walking around the zoo together and enjoying the zoo and everything. And we see that they have this like pop up in the zoo for bird friendly coffee. And I was like, oh my God, right? So we go to the bird friendly coffee and there's two people there. And the one woman I had like met before, but she didn't like remember me and that's fine. And then the other guy I'd never met before. And I was like, oh my God, I'm getting a delivery of the bird friendly coffee today. I was getting like 5 pounds delivered. And I was like, oh, I'm so excited. I haven't tried it yet. And they're like, here, try it. And we're like talking about bird friendly coffee and conservation and the impacts it makes. And they're like, yeah, this is just a pop-up. And, we hope people come and we're trying to see like how this fits. Like, can we do more pop-ups of this? Blah, 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 all that. And we're wrapping up our conversation, getting ready to go. And there's these people coming. And so in my mind, I'm like, oh, I should be noisy about how great this coffee is to attract people to this space. I didn't say that out loud. So we just had this totally normal, fine conversation. And then I like have my little cup of coffee and I'm like, wow, this is so amazing. Thanks so much for this. It's like
Yeah.
everyone should try this. And I just felt like and like, but I had just said I was getting this coffee and I was just, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna buy some, right? Even though I just said I was gonna get my coffee. Like it was weird. And if you knew me, you would have understood what I was doing. But if you didn't know me, it did not match up with,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And then so then I asked my mentee, I was like, hey, was that weird? And she was like,
Mm.
no, I think it was fine. And then I ran into that guy again, right? Like a month later. And I don't know how, but I knew his name. And so I was like, hey, sir, but saying his name. No one knows each other's names unless you wear a name tag at the zoo, right?
Uh-huh.
And then
Yeah.
he was like, "Oh, how was the coffee?" And so,
Oh, so he remembered that detail.
yeah, so it was okay. But I felt like a weirdo for a while after because we just had this conversation about me buying the coffee and I was excited to try it. And then like I'm walking away and I'm like, thanks so much. I can't wait to buy this. And like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I feel like what I feel like I'm hearing is that you don't want to be misunderstood by people.
Oh, that's a nice. Yeah, I think that's true.
Right? It's just like
Yeah.
you mentioned the first guy, and then with this situation, it's just like you're these people don't know you. And if they
Yeah.
knew you, it'd be different. Right? You'd feel less anxious, probably, if any anxiety
Yeah.
about what you're saying and doing, about your
Right.
behavior in a moment, right? And so
Right.
it's just like the desire to not be or feel misunderstood. That's all I'm hearing, which it's part of being anxious is worrying, but was worrying about that. So it makes sense to me. But yeah, that's what I feel like I heard
Okay.
in both
I can very
stories.
much feel that. That resonates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I have a follow-up question. I think
Yeah.
it's just like that's what I heard and I get it. It makes sense to me. It's a
Yeah.
shitty feeling like you're maybe being perceived differently than you are, or if you come off a certain way and you didn't mean to, and then having regret afterward. And when people don't know you, they're going to misinterpret or misunderstand your behavior or the way you say things or
Right.
sound or whatever.
And
And so,
also,
yeah.
like, ultimately, I don't really care. Like, if I said something offensive, I would care. But it's the anxious thoughts that get really annoying that make me stop and question, like, wait, was I weird? Wait. Right?
Mm,
Because, like, at first, it's like, no big deal. Right. And then the anxious thoughts are like, oh, he's going to think you're a stalker. Or, oh, he's going to be really confused. Like, did you lie about getting the coffee? Right. Like,
right, right. Do you
right.
think it comes from like previous experiences you've had where like you wonder where and why the anxiety shows up in the moment that it does? Like
Mhm.
you're going about your life, you're just having a conversation, whatever, and then all of a sudden it's like, was that weird? Right? And is it because I'm wondering out loud? So excuse me for like wondering
Mhm.
out loud, but like is it something in their eye contact, their facial expressions, because that's where, speaking from my perspective, that's where those intrusive thoughts start to come into my brain is
Mhm.
when because as an HSP, anyone that doesn't know what HSP is, highly sensitive person. As an HSP, I'm very keen to notice the slightest changes in
Mhm.
people's demeanor, facial expressions, body language, nonverbal cues, whatever. And so I'm wondering, like, that's when usually the anxiety starts to creep in, if I notice a shift in the person in my vicinity, who then
Mhm.
I have anxiety about.
Mhm.
Was that weird? Did I sound weird? Did I sound this? You know what I'm saying? Like, is it your history that gets you there, you think? Or is it like just being super sensitive to someone's reaction to you or something? Or are you not even noticing them? Is it
I would
only,
say both. In these instances, it probably comes from past things,
hmm,
right? In both instances, like I didn't see their faces with the facial cues.
hmm,
So with Blaine, it was when he was walking away that then I was like, oh my gosh, was I a weirdo? And that probably came from somewhere in my past where I was super excited to meet someone and then someone told
yeah,
me to modulate myself.
right.
And then in the coffee, I was walking away, so I couldn't see any cues. But I felt
All
like,
right then.
oh, was the thing I said weird because I had just said I was getting coffee, so why am I saying I'm gonna buy some, right?
Yeah.
But I can also relate to other moments by just reading people's cues and then that causing anxious thoughts and overthinking. So it's a
Hmm.
both, but in this situation, both times I would say it's more based on like past times of being told to modulate.
Interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder how our warriors listening can relate. I feel
Yeah.
like I feel like most of them. I feel like most of them. All right, I'm gonna hop back to this article.
Oh, okay. I was like, wait,
Yeah.
your story.
Well, let's hop back in.
Okay.
Let's hop back in for a second. So, understanding how others see you. The term meta perception refers to how an individual interprets other people's perceptions of them. Thinking highly of oneself is beneficial. Those who believe they are viewed positively by others tend to have higher self esteem. Most people's meta perceptions tend to be fairly accurate since individuals generally have a stable self concept that governs how they act around others. For example, if we believe that we're friendly and likable, we're more likely to act or continue to act in a friendly manner towards strangers.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like
Yep.
that was fair.
Yep.
And now here's this. How can you avoid making a bad first impression? It can be off-putting when someone comes on too strong at first. Common mistakes include trying to reveal too much about yourself too soon, dominating the conversation, or placing unreasonable demands on other people who you don't know well. When it comes to first impressions, it's best when the way you believe you are presenting yourself matches how others perceive you, which it's like, duh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that first one about like not saying too much is like, that's hard, especially for anxious attachments, because people are looking, when you have anxious attachment, you're looking one to connect and be accepted by people. And so you're like, okay, if I just tell them everything right away, let's see if these are right
Right.
people and they'll accept me. So that's like, that is something that I had to impression management skill build. Then when I learned about it, to not info dump. I
Mm,
saw that as a way of connecting and also seeing if like helping people understand me and
right.
like all those things. So
Yeah.
that's
And
a
also asking people too many questions too, because like it can go into the reverse. Because that's where I feel like I have an issue more often is when I'm like peppering people with a bunch of questions to get to know them so I don't have to reveal anything about myself. But then
yeah,
they're overwhelmed with the amount of questions I'm asking them. And
right.
like, okay, back up a little. Like maybe I don't need to be peppered with this many questions in like a 5 minute span. So I think it can go either way. Like you saying too much about yourself or about anything for that matter versus like also saying a lot, but you know, guising it under like, let me just find out about you, like a whole ton.
Right.
Um, yeah, so I thought that was interesting. So like what stood out to me in the first part was the part where it says most people's meta perceptions tend to be fairly accurate since individuals generally have a stable self-concept that governs how they act around others. And I feel like that's reasonable depending on your age,
Hmm.
right? Because I mean, having a self concept, it's just like, that's a really
It's
heady
changing. It's
concept.
so fluid and it starts to get a little bit more solid, I feel like in your late 30s, 40s.
Yeah, when you become an adult, like you just know yourself better the longer you've lived. And so having a strong self concept, I feel like is almost too much of a blanket statement for my liking. It feels like, if and when you have a true self concept, if you've worked on, finding yourself and working that out for yourself. So, and the other part that stood out in that section was, um, where is it? Is coming on strong. And
Mhm.
that's kind of how I feel like a lot of this happens for me. And so like I tried really hard to come up with like a single instance where I'm like, there's this one thing that happened recently or anytime even where it was like, I felt like weird, like kind of like what you were suggesting. And I wondered after the fact if that was weird, or I felt the need to check in with people about was I weird and honestly, I feel like it's so often that I genuinely could not come up with a single story that was like extremely relevant and pertinent that would, when I tell you that I spent a long time thinking about this, I promise you I did. But what I did come up with, right? And reading this article, there was a light bulb, a moment for me. It was just like, oh, it's just a general feeling of always wondering when I meet anyone new if I'm coming on too strong.
Mhm.
And usually that goes to some of the loudness or whatever. A lot of times it comes down to what I feel like I'm doing with my face. I feel like I have, resting bitch face like all the time. If I'm not placing a small smile on my lips, I feel like I look angry or, unbothered or irritated or, all these negative things that I may be completely neutral. And I feel like someone's looking at me, they're like, something's wrong with that person. There's something's off
Right.
or
She's
whatever.
judging me. She's this, she's that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's not approachable, whatever the situation.
Right.
And sometimes that's the case, I'm guessing. And then other times I'm just like, I feel like I'm just standing here and that's just the way I look. And right, so like I was so triggered when I read that first part about like 7 seconds, just the way you look. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, physical beauty or whatever aside, I feel like it's more about how my history has lent itself to me being anxious about first impressions because of people's reactions towards, oh, I thought you didn't want to talk to me, or like, because then when I do have a conversation with someone, a lot of times it's, I wasn't sure if you were, just maybe a little standoffish or didn't want to connect or chat or whatever. And I'm just like, no, I'm just hella socially anxious and like I don't know how to approach people. And or I clearly I'm giving off an energy that says don't come talk to me. And like, so then
Ah,
I'm stressed about when the next time I'm in a room where there's all new people, or even just, or if I don't know anybody, but everyone else seems to know each other, it could go one of two ways. I'm either super extroverted and like shaking hands with everybody and trying to get to know everyone or whatever, or I'm like standing against the wall, like, please nobody look at me or come talk to me.
yeah.
And so I feel like without saying like a specific, this happened and this is how I felt, it's just that this is just like the general, this is like my general being
Yes.
all the time, just
Yeah.
existing in the world.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, as you're saying that, I'm getting flooded with way more instances of like, oh, why did you say that? Oh, that's fucking weird. Like, right? Like, I don't think I have the face issue,
Mm.
but I just have like, I mean, I remember I like let someone have a pen and then I was like, you know, I love that pen, don't take it. Like, who says that when you're letting, right? But anyway, like as you're saying it, it's like flooding me with more memories. But so here's my question. So you and I both agree, like ultimately it doesn't matter, although we want to make good first impressions because maybe we want to make friends with these people,
Or
like
network or
for
whatever,
network. Yeah, right. Like, do you feel that when you walk away from the event, do you feel like flooded with anxious thoughts, even if you care or don't care?
I
Like, do you
guess it depends
think
on what
it?
ultimately happens.
Okay.
Like, was I able to hold a conversation with individuals or an individual? Did
Mhm.
I do the exact opposite of that? Did I, you know what I mean? Did I feel say what I wind up asking myself after the fact is less about, you know, my impression, I guess, and more about how it felt in my body to be there and
Mhm.
to leave. It's like,
Mhm.
I'm, I'm relatively strong at checking in with myself, and grounding me always first is checking in with my physical body. How does my body feel? How's my body reacting to interactions, to an energy of the space? Um, to walking away from that space? Do I feel ready to walk away from that space? Do I feel sad to walk away from that space? And so I'm not usually flooded with, you know, how did everyone perceive me? I'm usually flooded with how do I feel after all of those first
Mhm.
impressions?
Mhm.
And then if something particularly awkward happened, or I got a read, like I was saying before when I was asking you, I got a read from someone that maybe something I said or did or didn't land for them or whatever, then I'll leave with a little bit more like specific thoughts about, I wish that interaction was different, or I wonder if that person's still thinking about that interaction. Will they never want to talk to me again? And ultimately, like we've been saying, I don't really care because it's like either they're good for me or they're not. Either they're going to be in
Right.
my life in some small way or big way, or they're not. And
Right.
so it doesn't stay for a long time, those feelings. It just kind of like goes away after
Yeah.
a certain a nondescript amount of time. It varies, right? Like there are some instances where you might be thinking about it for weeks at a time or years at a time. That not it's not the case for me typically, but like I'll be thinking about it if I felt like it was particularly negative or really weighing on me, hours maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Usually no more than that though,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know? But I
Yeah.
don't know if my younger self would have been different about it. I truly don't know, but my current day self is just kind of like
Yeah.
couple hours in, I'm like, all right, why am I still thinking about this? Like, I'm sure this person hasn't given me a second thought. So,
Totally.
yeah.
And that's, I mean, I think that that's like one of the nice things about aging is because
Yeah.
when I was younger, like I would have overthought these things for so much more. I probably wouldn't even been so aware of it. It would have been just like incessant chatter in the back of my head, overthinking it without
Yeah.
me even being aware until finally I'm like, ah, right? But
Totes.
nowadays I notice it and I'm annoyed by it because it's like, I don't care. But also it is, anxious thoughts that pop up
Yeah.
after like feeling socially awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like what we're saying here, warriors, is that there's a certain level of normalcy to feeling some kind of way after we've made an impression, a first impression on a person or people, right? To be anxious about leading up to meeting that person or people, maybe to be anxious during that interaction, and then maybe afterwards. There's a certain amount of just like, that's just human nature. That's human behavior to feel some kind of way about it. Now, whether you let it sit with you for a long time, whether it ruminates, whether it impacts other parts of your life, right? Then that's a conversation that you have to have with maybe a therapist or someone else um, with some kind of medical degree,
I
not a
know
podcast.
someone that will help you with impression management skills.
Impression. I
Help
mean, the
you
way you've latched to
modulate.
this phrase.
Yeah, I love it. I wrote it down. Impression management skills. I'm
Yeah,
all about
because it makes
skill
you feel like
building.
right, there's something for you to work on that
Yeah.
isn't necessarily judging, right? It's just like, okay, so maybe warriors, you can sit down and make a list of what was it? I don't even remember. I have the article in front of me.
Impression management skills.
Impression management skills. What can you do? What kinds of big and small things can you do to assist you in at least feeling better about the way you approach
Right.
people, right? And being aware without being super unkind or judgmental to yourself, either during a moment or after a moment.
Mhm.
Because ultimately, I think that most people aren't judging you for the long haul, right? Like maybe they're getting a weird, maybe the vibe's weird. They're like, okay, that was kind of an awkward first impression. And yes, as we've learned, first impressions can be important, but they are not the be all end all. And so remembering that too, right? So you can work on those on the skill sets, growing the skill set, and also work on your own compassion and understanding that like maybe you just need to actually be more intentional with that person the next time you interact with them, right? Get if you worry that they saw you in some kind of way, what can you say and do that might change their perspective this time around,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, I feel like for me the sweet spot is in like the second or third time I meet a person. And
Yeah.
sometimes we can acknowledge that first impressions are hard and maybe they're not for us, and there's
Right.
nothing wrong with that either inherently. So
Especially if both people have social anxiety. It's like,
totally.
yeah. By the third one, we're
100%.
feeling a little bit more comfort.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, Margot, do you have a win of the week? Win of the week.
Of the week. Well, since we've been podcasting less and we've been doing like a bunch of little mini wins of the week the last couple of
Mm-hmm.
times, I'm gonna offer up a couple because there are so many good ones that I want to share because it's been so long since we've recorded together. The first one is that I was in DC this past weekend with my
Mm-hmm.
Cheetah Pack, my book club friends, and we were lucky enough to be able to tour the White House, and it was flipping fucking phenomenal. It was one of the coolest things I've ever done in my life. I highly recommend that everyone, contact their congressperson and try to get permissions. It's kind of a laborious process. We luckily didn't have to go through that process because one of our group members is, adjacent to government. And so we were able to get on the list a little bit easier. Obviously, still background checked and all of that kind of stuff, but it wasn't challenging to get on the list. But normally, if you want to visit the White House, you can. You just have to go through the process that it takes. And it was so cool. So much history. I mean, so many cool little ins and outs that you're just like, oh my God, I'm standing in a place where so much important stuff has happened over the course of so many lives, so many decades upon decades. And yeah, it was kind of an emotional experience. And it was just fun. There's a lot of beauty, and the docents are so smart. They share, you could ask them anything about the art on the walls or about the history from the room, and were ready and willing to just chat with you. And it was awesome. It was about 90 minutes, which we heard was kind of long. That's
Mm-hmm.
like normally they don't go that long, but we didn't feel rushed, and it was just very special. So aside from getting to spend a great weekend away with some friends, I got to tour the White House, and that was a massive win.
Yeah.
And then last night, my sister, through her company, got me and Adam tickets for the new cabaret with
Ooh.
Eddie Redmayne and BB Newirth. And oh my gosh, it was such an experience. It was, a 360 movable stage.
Oh
There
my
was
God.
audience. They changed the August Wilson Theater completely since last time I was there. 360 stage, orchestras on both sides, but up high. So they were like eye line with us because we were in the mezzanine. Cabaret tables and on the orchestra, obviously normal mezzanine. And there was seats around. It wasn't just seats on one side for mezzanine. There was mezzanine on the other side. You could look up and see the people on the other side of the theater. And the entire experience was fully immersive. Like as soon as you walked through the doors, you were like in the alley to walk into the club. And then you got inside, there was dancers and open bar. And like they were giving everyone, cherry schnapps shots. And it was very, very cool. Performances were
Wow.
excellent. So those are my two like recent big wins.
Yay. So
Yay.
fun.
So much fun. It was so fun. Highly recommend the both. Okay. Warriors, we love you so much. Thank you for being with us again this week. If you'd like to connect with us for any reason, join our Instagram fam. We're at Anxiety Warriors Podcast. Or you can shoot us an email at anxietywarriorspodcast at gmail.com to shout out your wins of the week, big or small, to share any topic ideas that you have for us. What do you want to hear us chat about on the show? Or if you think you would be an amazing guest, we'd love to hear from you. Let's get your story told here on the pod. Please take a moment and smash the 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're tuning in right now. You can also like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. All of our episodes are uploaded for you over there. And if you're feeling extra generous, grab yourself something fun from our Threadless merch shop, and that link is in our show notes.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all so much for going on this journey with us. We are so grateful we get to do this with y'all.
Till next time.